Namaste, namaste, everyone. Thank you for taking time out and attending our HD talk for today. I'm your host and moderator for today's session. As we all know, one of the goals of the Hindu decoloniality group, apart from, of course, having a very enriching and buzzing Facebook community, is to bring you a diverse set of stories and voices from people in the Indic fold. The purpose of these talks is to enlighten, educate, and inspire everyone within the community. We are hoping these talks will help give everyone, especially younger Sanatanis who are setting out on their own, will give them strength, strategies to live a more aware and authentic dharmic life. And at the same time, also be able to counter any overt or covert Hinduphobic attacks at school or at work. With this, I would also like to introduce our guest for today. We are speaking to Abhishek Sharma. Abhishek is an NRI, born and brought up in a tier 3 city in the Hindi heartland of India. He has had an Ivy League education, having studied at one of the top schools in the world, and he's currently working in a big consulting firm. Abhishek's story is quite interesting, and I believe it will echo with many first generation students and working professionals in the current day US because it covers layers of coloniality and Hinduphobia and their impact on his personal and professional growth. Today, Abhishek is with us to share his experiences of having grown up in India, the special circumstances that made him into a slightly confused, maybe, or an ambivalent Sanatani, and how it impacted his work and life in the US, making him fall prey to Hinduphobic and racist attacks. But of course, we don't have to worry. Abhishek's story does not end on a negative note, thankfully. It is, in fact, a story of much hope and inspiration where he has learned to come to terms with his Sanatani identity and is now actively countering veiled attacks and voicing his opinions at forums and platforms that matter. So, without much ado, I will let Abhishek take it on from here. Namaste and welcome, Abhishek.
Namaste, Muktaji. Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction and giving me this opportunity to voice my story today.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time out. Abhishek, I'm sure there's a lot that all of us in the audiences can learn from you today and your experience. So I think we should just get started with our discussion. We'll keep it free flowing.
Mhm.
When once people join in, they can add in their comments, ask queries, and so on. Why don't we start with a brief introduction on you and what is it that you've been doing, etc.
Of course, sure. Let me first begin by saying that there is a reason I'm here today to speak about my story. Uh, More than the personal element to my experiences, I want to make sure that whatever has happened to me does not happen to anyone else. And if there are people facing similar things elsewhere in the world, especially in the Western societies, they know how to take control of their narrative, and probably to the extent that my story can help them, it lends some help. And to also, I mean, the reason I'm trying to hide my identity is because not because I want to remain anonymous, but I have to, because there are people out there who are ready to dox you, and Hinduphobia is still not a term that is readily identified and accepted. And there can be consequences of speaking. So I just want to let that be known, and this is what makes this talk very much important. Like to have the space of talking openly about attacks that we are facing. With that, let me start with a small introduction about myself. I come from, like Muktaji mentioned, from a small nuclear family with traditional values from a tier 3 city in the Hindi heartland of India. I grew up during the 90s. I'm a child of the 90s when internet connections were very slow. We had dial up connections, and probably our extent of social media while we were growing up was limited to Orkut and like 15-minute, internet windows. So much of our exposure to things came either from directly our families or the school systems or maybe some bit of TV or news. Um, and over the past few years, and I'm going to cover this in a little detail later on, I have gone through probably three pivotal moments in my life where I have switched from being an affirmative Hindu to a checkbox Hindu, and now an assertive Hindu. Uh, yeah, probably that's the best way I can capture all of these three, Muktaji.
Very interesting. We would be more interested in knowing um, uh, about these various phases in your life. Uh, could you walk us through your growing up years in India
Yeah, yeah.
as a student,
So,
all the influences that you've had, and how did it mold your
yeah,
personality and
that
identity?
it did a lot actually. And in hindsight, after like moving out of school, and now that I've been reading more about decoloniality and Hinduphobia over the past couple of years, I've realized I've done a lot of post processing, and so many things make a lot of sense now. Um, I don't know if I mentioned this to you earlier, but I studied in a strict Catholic school environment, Um and that it itself had a big role to play in converting me into a Hinduphobe, along with the education system in India at the time, which was driven by the then government regime. Uh, and I can cite some examples. So, for example, my siblings who were a few years elder to me, when they were in the same standard, I think it was the sixth standard, Ramayana and Mahabharata was a compulsory reading in schools. And I think I don't want this to make this political, but I think at that time the BJP was the government in power. And soon a new government dispensation came in. And by the time we came to the sixth standards, uh, our textbooks were reduced to very simple readings on a few chapters of, like probably a few sections of uh, southern Indian kingdoms. The Pallavas and the Cholas, they were limited to a few paragraphs. And then in the seventh standard, I remember very clearly, we spent an entire year reading about pre Mughal Islamic invasions and then the Mughal invasions. And there were chapters and chapters dedicated to it. So, this the, reading the history this way, I think I feel now that I almost feel like I was robbed of the opportunity to learn something true and honest about my culture and the history. Uh, there were a few more examples, but I mean, like, I just wanted to highlight this because it has had such a big impact. I we were grown like we grew up to believe that we were always a defeated civilization. There was not like as if we did not have much going on in our lives till the Islamic invasions happened, and that's simply not true. And
Right.
it angers me a lot today that I deserved to know that, and I haven't. And much more than from the much more than the information loss, the kind of impact it has had on my personality, and so many things I have missed out on because
Yeah.
of that impact on my personality over the past few years. And
Yeah.
I'll come back to this probably a little later, of how it affected me professionally and personally. I mean, it's a loss that uh, cannot be compensated for now. It's what the damage has been done, and I can only imagine what others like me are feeling today.
Right. I mean, just this realization that you've been robbed, and it's your job to now re-educate yourself and get to know about what has really happened in history. It can be daunting. It can also, like you said, make you feel cheated. Um, and this entire feeling of, we not being a good enough, forget great, good enough nation, not having achieved any achievements to our credit, uh, can be really detrimental for any child growing up, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Truly,
yeah.
truly. And
So,
then there's
yeah.
also this element of, Mhm. Sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to ask about, I just wanted to step back here and speak to you about your education board. You mentioned that you attended a strict Catholic school. So, is that very common in India?
It is actually, and especially in smaller cities, there's like this. As it has this aspirational value. We
Hmm.
often forget that our parents and even our grandparents, in a lot of cases, come from post-colonial societies, and they also carry their own colonial baggage. Uh, so convent schools, in that regard, carry this aspirational value that they produce, fluent English-speaking students who perform well when they go out in the professional world. It might have had some truth to it in the past, but what I've seen now over the past few years, a positive change actually, is that the market is much more open, and there are a lot of schools that are coming up which are not convents, which are not Catholic schools or Christian schools outrightly, and they're still performing good. They have good education outcomes. For example, during our times, the only competition to convent schools in my area was a Kendriya Vidyalaya. Um,
Hmm.
so that also had like a very clear distinction, and you could see the difference between the gentry, so to say, going to these two schools. I also feel that this points to a larger sinister design. The missionary schools, if you see, they have a lot of heavy activity in smaller cities and even villages. The city that I was born and brought up in, uh,
Hmm.
you go 15 minutes outside the city and you start, crossing villages. And you could see these small villages with populations of a few hundred people having huge schools, big schools that could accommodate probably 1,000 or 2,000 students at a time. There's no reason
Hmm.
for it. It's just land grab opportunity. So it's like it's a much larger design. I mean, like it can be a podcast of its own one day,
Hmm.
but it is this very vicious nexus of the government, the state, the regime sitting in the center, the people who are making syllabus, plus the school, and then to that mix you add, when the Hindu temples, for example, are under state control, uh,
Hmm.
we don't have access to our own cultural, information and knowledge. So
Right.
I call that, the double whammy of
Yeah.
lack of knowledge about Hindu festivals and culture on the one hand, through the education system as well as through post-colonial society, and the clever, consistent, and coordinated messaging from the Christian school system that primes students like us, uh, to become Hindu folks later on.
So, could you explain this a little more? Like, what was happening in the school, and why do you say these schools prime students to become Hindu phobes? Could you share
Yeah.
examples
So,
from your, yeah, past? Yeah.
yeah, sure. So, for example, see, since in my case, since this was a Catholic school, an outrightly, explicitly Catholic school, probably some of the things might not apply. But clearly, I've seen very similar things happen in public schools today as well. So, largely, what happens is, consistently, we're not taught enough about Hindu traditions, Hindu festivals, Hindu culture, but we are taught more about, for example, Eid, about Guru Nanak Jayanti, about Christmas, and more about Christmas. Especially in my school, Christmas used to be a big thing. Whether you wanted to participate it or not, you had no choice. You had to say "Our Father in Heaven." You had to recite that. When you were greeting certain nuns in the school, they asked us not to say hello or good morning. They asked us to say "Praise the Lord, sister." Um, I remember one instance very clearly, and I think it is very relevant to this discussion. So in our school, there was a special emphasis laid on speaking in English and cursive handwriting, as you can guess, since this was a Catholic school. And if you were caught speaking in English consistently a few times, there was a box kept in the like a piggy bank kind of a box in the classroom where you had to put like a 5 rupee coin. And at that time, 5 rupees were still something. So you had to put in a 5 rupee coin if you were caught speaking in English, in Hindi, sorry. So there was a student who was caught speaking in Hindi, and then she was asked to not just pay the fine, but she was also asked to speak the next day at the school assembly on how English is an important language and how, basically glorifying English. So the next day, she came to the school assembly. She started a speech talking about English, how it is a bridge language, and all those things. And then she immediately switched to what language means to people, and how Hindi or any other native language for that matter is probably something that one needs to protect. This did not go down well with the school authorities,
That was brave
and
of
she was reprimanded for it. That was very brave of her. And I think she also did this because she had a backing from her family, because they knew what was going on. So as soon as she was, pulled up and reprimanded, her parents were also called to the school, and they registered a protest. And they also brought along with them a few other people who were politically, aware and involved in the area. And then soon it became like a big talk of the town. It is a small town, so it immediately became a big town, big talk in the town, and it was also covered in local media. But that was one big incident that I remember from school. But you know what actually irks me even till date? My reaction to that incident. I could never see through how it was actually a resistance about, this entire Hinduphobic setting in the place. My first reaction at that time, I was an affirmative Hindu, and by that I mean I wasn't assertive, but I was a practicing Hindu, and I used to celebrate Diwali. I used to celebrate all of these things, and I was curious about my culture in general. But even with that, my first reaction, oh, it's so regressive, and why are we talking about Hindi? It is so, like in the Bombay terminology, it is so ghati, as they say. It is so
yeah.
like, down market. Why do we want to talk about that? It is so old school. It is so orthodox.
It's not
But
cool to speak in
how could I
Hindi.
have thought about that? Exactly. And the first thing that comes to your mind when you're in an English speaking environment when someone speaks in Hindi is, oh, this person is like almost like a Bhagwa saffron background comes. And the same thing happened to me in school at that time as well. So, and I wasn't like, we aren't born like this, right? And no one at home was talking to us like this. No one was feeding all of these things. So where did this thing come from? It's definitely not coming from entirely from textbooks. So it could have only happened through the school environment.
Yeah.
So I don't know very exactly what happened and what I was being told, but the outcome was this.
And this happened in a state which is in the Hindi heartland.
True.
I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was the, yeah, right. What other any other incidents, examples that you can share of? I mean, I know of my, if I could add an example here, I have known friends who've studied in Catholic schools, also studied in Hindu management schools, public, funded by public as well as private funds. And I, even having grown up in a sort of Hindu management school, I think what you share is something that even we've experienced. And now thinking back, I feel it was so strange. For example, for a lot of festivals that we celebrate, we would, girls would typically apply mehendi. And despite being a Hindu management school, it was an absolute no to be seen with mehendi, even on during festivals, or even, let's say, out of 365 days, even if you ended up with a mehndi or one or 2 days during the year, it used to create a lot of ruckus. Your teachers would send a note home that your child is not supposed to be seen with such with mehendi and so on and so forth. No bindi, no nothing at all. So while yours is a Catholic management school, and maybe it was their prerogative, but we were a Hindu management school, and I don't think even we escaped the vestiges or the hangover of colonialism.
Wow. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
similar things have happened in my school as well. And for example, I could see there were Christian students in our class, and they would be excused, or they would be allowed to lead lectures to prepare for some function in the church, for example. So this kind of, like, I wouldn't say preferential treatment, but special treatment, and then also like glorifying things that Christmas is all about, good celebration, and chocolates and candies. Like, to me, I mean, like today, I feel it sounds like almost like child abuse, because you're kind of conditioning children to think that way, and like while you're keeping access to everything else apart from that closed. Uh, and like I can actually like now move on to an interesting phase during my adolescent phase. And I say this because I remember sometime during my adolescent years, I, as any adolescent would and should, question things. So I questioned Hindu values and faith, because by that time, the defining words for me regarding Hindu faith had become superstitious, many gods, orthodox, and either or, between progressing in life or choosing to become a sadhu, with no in between. So it almost became as if, either you can progress or you can stick to your faith or culture, and there was no in between. Christianity, on the other hand, was, seemingly more egalitarian, equal. It was modern, with having a global appeal. It was very glamorous: stars, glitters, candies, Santa, etc. So this is also something that happens when you don't have access to your own, culture and faith, and when you're being consistently bombarded with, these ideas. I discussed this with my mother, and she was quick to bring me back to my senses with a sharp, off-handed rebukes. And this is like a patent owned by Indian mothers. But eventually, I gave up the idea, both because it wasn't something I was deeply invested into, and and this is the interesting part. There was some resistance internally to give up my own faith, even with all of this gap and lack of access internally, because there were many things that I liked about my own faith, and also as a genuinely impartial party, because I was very naive. I was trying to question things, and I was trying to know more, and I was coming from a very pure place. I did not have any biases at that time. I could see the flaws in Christianity, which also prevented me from accepting it completely. So probably one message to the audience is, like, if you feel that there is some resistance to things, you still have something to hold on to, and you can start pulling on that rope to start tracing your way back, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can imagine how jarring it must be, because on the one side, you receive a concerted messaging in school, in media, in storybooks, through Bollywood. And on the other side, you have your own religion, your rituals, your annual festivals, which is slightly more muted. So any which way, there's lack of information, there is a lack of understanding, and then the other side is just relentless, and they're very good storytellers. Now that you brought this up, I recall one incident. I think I must have been in the first standard, and like I said, I studied in a predominantly public funded Hindu management school, and one day, I think on the 23rd or the 24th of December, our class teacher came in, and she asked us all to sort of buy socks and put up socks, either keep socks near our pillows at night, or put it tied to the entrance of the house. And all she said was, you will receive gifts in the morning tomorrow. And all of us were quite excited. We didn't know in what context this was, but we were all very excited. So imagine a class of 60 students going home telling their parents that, let's keep socks at the entrance door. And our parents, I remember even then, my friends being excited, me being excited, but my parents speaking to each other, okay, what is this? What does this mean? What is the child expecting us? What is the messaging that the school is giving? And I think most parents good naturedly also ended up buying socks, keeping it. My parents, of course, understood, and they gave me some sweets, some chocolates, I remember, in the morning. But all the many other parents were not so open, and their kids were pretty unhappy that, I'd kept socks on the 25th, I didn't get any gifts. So what was this like? Who was supposed to come, and why did this happen? And once we went back after the Christmas break to school, half the class kept asking the teacher, what was it, who was going to give us gifts, and why did you promise something which was not delivered? I think this went on for 2 years, after which
Oh,
I think a lot of parents came to the school, spoke to the management. I mean, uh, everybody felt quite uncomfortable without actually disregarding, let's say, practices of another community, people of another religion. Hindu parents felt quite uncomfortable because this was directly coming from the teacher, and it was
mhm.
across divisions. We had A division, B, it was happening in the afternoon division, and everybody was very uncomfortable. Interesting, I recall this example now when you mentioned that so much of messaging that we received then and which we continue to receive now is also so, it makes everything about, let's say, Christmas, about magic, a time of light, loving, December, winter, coziness, and which it may probably be also for the practitioners of the religion. But this forced communication towards people who are non practitioners, I think it really does make them, if you're not rooted, it can take you time to understand what is happening, and these are concerted efforts to probably proselytize.
True, true. And also, like, for example, when your culture, your festivals, your traditions are not talked about either, like, in these settings, or when you see it on
Everything
TV,
is
it's
hush
never
hush.
glorified.
Yes.
Nothing is, it's everything
Yes.
is hush hush. So basically, you have nothing to hold on to. You're not given even a single chance to feel proud about something. And at the
Yeah.
same time, when you see, something else from the other side coming, and you like people feeling very proud about it, it certainly creates, first of all, this inferiority complex, and then also
Yeah.
it creates some aspirational value for the other side. So I think this creates like completely conditions generations and generations, and makes them, like, prime, targets for proselytization.
If we were to think this happens, this continues to happen even today. When you look at, I mean, a very simple messaging around desserts and sweets and the way they are covered throughout the year in popular newspapers in
Mhm.
India. So if it's a Holi, if it's a Diwali, you will still have these columnists, food writers, and chefs who will share recipes of Indian sweets, but it will always come with a disclaimer from the newspaper, ration how much you eat, look at your portions, don't eat too many sweets. India is the diabetes capital of the world. And the messaging completely changes when it is, let's say, an Eid or a Christmas, where people will ask you to go
True.
out, bake cakes, have muffins, have chocolates, have these Christmas goodies. And then it is all about bonhomie and warmth of Christmas. And it's quite, the messaging itself is quite jarring, and you can see, what is being attempted.
Very true. For the adults, it's the rice bags. For the children, it's candy bags.
True, true. Yes, Abhishek. So one question: how did this? We've spoken about a lot of influences and instances while growing up. How did this, I mean, was this a, did you actively think about these things? Did it impact you and your friends? How, when you came into your teens and your early adult life, what therefore was the impact on you and your personality and your worldview?
Yeah, yeah. So this brings me to my first pivotal point. Um, and all of this was when I wasn't introduced to the concept of left as such. When I started working, I was introduced to colleagues. So during my college years, I wasn't like very politically active, and plus I was in a very closed environment. So probably I was getting the same conditioning, uh, but it wasn't. It hadn't become like a pivotal moment. It hadn't like kind of like skewed things to an extent that it kind of created some churn inside me. So this happened when I started working. When I started working, I was introduced to colleagues who came from different age groups and colleges, and this is when two interesting things happened. I was introduced to the leftist or anti-Indic and Indic ideology through two separate sets of colleagues and friends. At the same time, at this time, I started reading a few books. For example, Shashi Tharoor, he became my role model. I wanted to be like him. Now I don't. Like I have like a list of like 13 reasons why not. Um, Curious after reading his books like Pax Indica, etc., etc. I would ask questions to these like two sets of friends and got uh, different, but interestingly like not opposing feedback. One side told me how Shivaji killed several lakhs of Bengalis and how they've never forgiven him, how there has never been a single native identity to India. It's like just a patchwork of different states that was stitched together. How Lata Mangeshkar, interestingly, at this one, how Lata Mangeshkar was actually an undeserving artist who sabotaged the careers of her sisters using her romantic relationships and clout with music directors. On the other hand, the other side simply asked me, like, by the other side, I mean, like the Indic side. So whenever I had like questions about, why is this happening in Mahabharata, or like, why is Modi a mass murderer, and so on. So I was speaking the language of the left. The other side never actually like kind of shamed me or like put labels on me. They just asked, "Have you actually read the document that says so, or is this just hearsay? Have you actually read the Mahabharata?" So these were very different feedbacks, but not opposing, although they belong to the supposedly opposite camps. So this was a very interesting point because the questions from the intake side actually irked me a lot because at this point, you see, my inclinations are already like pretty much set owing to these years of conditioning that had like converted me into a Hinduphobe. Even I was a practicing Hindu myself, and this is also I think I want to come back to later. I want to talk about the duality like of being a Hindu person, being a Hinduphobe, and so on. But yeah, this at this point the churn had started happening about what's right, what's wrong, what's left, what's right. So this was a very interesting phase.
This is very interesting. You bringing up Lata Mangeshkar. I think for the benefit of the audience, I should share that any public icon, any personality who's unabashedly Hindu and takes pride in Hindu heritage or culture is always ridiculed by the left. This is an example that even I've always come across from my friends on the left who'll always say that, actually she wasn't even that great a singer. There were faults in her notes, and she wasn't as good as she was made out to be. She was responsible, like you said, responsible for crushing the careers of her sisters. And I always found that strange because clearly I always felt maybe I'm not trained in music and I don't understand the technicalities, but to me, her voice sounds godlike. It's melodious. She's really brilliant at her craft. So, anyone, I think, whether it was Shivaji, whether it was Lata Mangeshkar, any person in the, I think the same thing happened with, if I'm not wrong, Dhoni, uh, ex Indian captain, where he showed a lot of support for the Indian army. While he will not ascertain his identity, he's not a assertive Hindu, but he's always been speaking for the Indian armed forces. And I think people equate it with being a very strong Hindu. And he is often ridiculed for his English. He also comes from the Hindi heartland, and he's always ridiculed for not being able to put any words together, any string, any sentences together. And I think these are the common sort of scapegoats for or guinea pigs for the people on the left to pull down. They'll go after your idols, your personalities who take pride in Indian and Hindu heritage, actually.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it also
yeah,
creates like a bad precedent, first of all, and also creates, fear. So anyone who wants to showcase their Hindu culture and identity, they will refrain from doing so because they know what the consequences are. You would become a pariah in your industry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And interesting that you mentioned Shashi Tharoor. I think for a lot of people, he was and still is a role model. I think a lot of it comes from the baggage of either not being able to speak well in English or aspiring to speak like him. Of course, there have been memes, and now even he jokes about his long sentences and his difficult words and stuff like that. But there is still a feeling that, oh, we wish we could speak as well and with so much confidence as Shashi does.
Yeah, the thing about Shashi Tharoor, interestingly, is that if you look at his work, his literary work, and now that we know that people like J. Sai Deepak are there who are ready to like rebut him with arguments because they have, they know their like they've done their homework and they're there to
Mm.
rebut him based on his facts. One thing that came to the fore when J. Deepak was having a discussion with Shashi Tharoor, and like it was like a another talk. He did not actually he did not point out his flaws in that talk, but later on he mentioned that Shashi Tharoor spoke something about Vivekananda, and like the way he spoke, it created doubts that has he like whether he had actually read any of his works because he was quoting something totally different. And
Mm.
that to me is a very interesting thing because a Shashi Tharoor, a person like him of his stature, is supposed to know things and is supposed to have read things. So there are only two ways of explaining this. Either he is not intelligent enough to read something, to read facts and evidence, and to read books, and to come at a wrong conclusion. Or the second possibility is that he knows what the facts and the evidence tell, but he's misrepresenting them because he
Yeah,
has some ulterior motive or a hidden agenda.
yeah,
So either he's like a dumb person or he's a morally bankrupt person. Both of these things are really bad, and I would want to stay away from such a person. So I've like literally like given up on uh, like looking up to him as a role model.
right, right. So, like you mentioned, you always had these two sort of groups coming at you. One was, of course, the leftists who were,
Hmm.
so as to say, wanting to onboard you. And there was always another side, maybe people from the Indic side who would maybe not give you too much dope, but ask you to think through, critically think, read the source, and then make up your
Hmm.
mind. What kind of impact did it have, and where did you go from here?
Oh, this brings me to the okay, very interesting. So this brings me to my second pivotal moment, and this happened when um, I had moved to the US for my studies. I was like you have mentioned, I was elated to join the Ivy League in one of the top universities in the world, uh, and by being like by virtue of being exposed to friends from journalism school, I was now ready to be slaughtered in the gallows. I learned about how concepts of power structures, intersectionality, equality, and preserving the balance of democracy was the sole right of the left because the right was hell-bent on bringing the world down with hatred and divisiveness and moving us back to the Stone Ages and whatnot. Um, at this point, I should mention that I had friends who were hardcore leftists, and I was systematically groomed into becoming a leftist. Not because they actually wanted to, like they were taking orders from someone else, but they genuinely believed that this was an ideology to follow, and it for them, like this idea of the left or liberalism was not just a political ideology, it was a way of life for them. So just like there is Hindutva, there is Leftitva, if I can
Wow.
put it that way. So they were actually trying to recruit me. So for example, one of the friends actually he consistently asked me for a week, have you read the leftist manifesto? Have you read the leftist manifesto? Read this article about Chimamanda Adichie. Read this article about this. See, they are talking about intersectionality here. See, this is, how caste does things, Dalits, and so on. And then eventually, I even attended my first and the last leftist meeting in my life. Um, I mean, it was a very funny sight, but
Wow.
I was very
Where did
uncomfortable
this
there as soon as I went.
where did this
So this
meeting?
was
Was it an online
somewhere.
meeting?
Yeah,
Was
so
it
it was
online,
in some
offline?
very random place. I don't. No, no, it was a physical meeting actually, and it
Okay.
was in Washington Heights in New York.
Okay.
So I had to take a train along with this friend, and it was in a physical space where people were meeting. And all I remember was that they were very bitter, um, and they always like, and this is a consistent pattern. There's always like this bitterness, this inherent hatred for people who are rich, inherent hatred for the state. Like there's no faith at all in good things in life. All that matters is like comrades around them, and just constant barrage of questions, and no answers. And I remember being so naive that I put up my hand and I said like I probably have a solution, and we should like stop talking about problems, and this can be a potential solution. And then I remember everyone else in the room was looking like staring at me, and my friend asked me to just sit down, just sit down. You don't know, you literally spoke about capitalism in a leftist meeting. So that happened with me.
They would have been enraged. Hmm.
They were very enraged, but this wasn't the first mistake that I made. Another mistake was when I was interning at a media house. Little did I know that this was a hardcore leftist media house. And when I was working as an intern there on a different thing. I wasn't on the editorial team, but I was very interested in writing articles, and I wanted to try my hand at that. So I wrote very naively. I wrote, and this media house was also has a sister publication in India. So for those who know, probably they already know what this was, which publication this was. So I wrote a message to the editor on the Indian side about a good story that I could actually write, because I was very interested in that. And this is me coming from the leftist side. By that time, I had already identified myself, left of center, and I wanted to fight for equality, Dalit rights, and whatnot. And when it came to Dalit rights, it also came to it came to talking about the right to practice their own life, right? So any kind of proselytization attempt was also against Dalit rights. So in my naive little world, I wrote to this editor, "Hey, I have a very good story about proselytization. There's a website called Joshua Project, which publishes like an entire document which contains taluk level information of small Hindu populations on how they can be converted, and what kind of prayers you need to make them to emancipate these people who are very dirty, and they have no way of living, and they don't even take baths and so on. So these are the prayers that are actually mentioned on the website. And I
Wow.
remember the editor writing to me, "This is not a relevant topic. We want to talk about some burning issues like da 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 da." And after that, he stopped taking my messages. He stopped responding. And I also remember how an outspoken African journalist left because she saw that the outlet was always working on presenting everything through the Western lens. And being a native African herself, she had no dibs, and she had no rights to talk about her own culture. So, yeah,
Your own
these were
indigenous culture.
very
Yeah.
efficient ways of gaslighting things. Yeah.
So what happened then? Were you able to at then were you able to see that what how did this make you feel as someone who was, so to say, in their camp or in agreement with them or a part of that camp?
Yeah. So at this point, what happened was when this rejection came in, uh, I knew something was off. And I kind of always knew something was off because there was an internal resistance. And I keep bringing this word resistance because, see, this is how it was, manifesting itself. And I almost see this as some kind of divine intervention at every step. That whenever I wanted to make a switch on the other side, something kept pulling me back. Um, so there was always this resistance that I saw internally because I was genuinely coming from, like from a place of good faith. I wanted to do something nice because I really liked that, the left, so to say, like believed in equality and whatnot, right? But
Yeah.
it wasn't the case because they always wanted to create rift in the first place. For like their entire existence depended upon creating rifts. So I could see there was some dissonance. And when these all of these things happened, like the rejection of my topic to the editor or this African journalist leaving, I knew something is off. So at this point, I mean, I knew something was off. So I did not want to be part of this anymore. And I also did not want to go on the other side. So I was left in an even more confused state. But I had started asking questions. I knew
Yeah.
that I wanted to call out the hypocrisy. And that also did not go down well with my friends. And but what happened next was that I kind of internalized everything and I kept shut because I had nowhere to go. Because I had voluntarily left the Indic side, and then now I had become a pariah from the left.
Hmm.
So this kind of entrenched, like both not Hindu phobia, but it entrenched the lack of confidence, self-esteem that comes with Hindu phobia.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned somewhere that you didn't realize that you were being groomed. What do you mean by that? So
Mhm.
are you saying that this is a concerted effort and they actively try to, onboard people who are probably coming from India, or people who are very who are not that entrenched in their own cultures and heritage? Could you just speak a little about that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot, actually. I can speak a lot about that because I see that happening. It was so for what was happening to me was probably in the student circles through my friends, right? It happens a lot on the academic campuses. For example, a friend of mine was working with a professor from the history or the literature department on a very random project because at that time we just wanted some extra money. This was a very random project on something about tracing, the like the travails of a Mughal king in like the Akhand Bharat during that time. Of course, they did not call it Akhand Bharat. Um, and turns out, last year I learned that this professor was an already known face on the index side, and he was one of the keys, like the sponsors or the key persons in organizing this conference called Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference.
Wow.
And then I came to know like that this is a very, very well thought out process. So all of these small, tiny, mini, innocuous seeming projects, they all add up to a larger scheme, which helps them with setting up very strong academic quarters for themselves. They're present everywhere, and they recruit students like this. I also saw very active. I mean, like in my college, it was completely left. So the Indian
And we're
Students
talking about an
Association
Ivy League
was,
college, an Ivy League, one of the
oh
top
yeah, oh yeah,
universities in the world,
yeah,
where
yeah,
anyway you have to
and you would not
adjust.
see,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, you would not see any representation of Indic voices in the, and I've like, I mean, it's very easy to get into these schools if you write bad things about India. India is bad and we need to do this, we need to do that. Instant admission into the college. That's how I feel because I did not see a single person, even unbiased or like neutral. They always were very opinionated and they took pride in self-flagellation and saying that, oh, we come from a poor country, or we need to fix this. And this is even, I mean, like if you look at dating sites and dating apps, now I've started seeing profiles where people are saying, don't go out to me, don't go out on a date with me if you're a bhakt. Don't go out on a date with me if you don't go to therapy, or if you don't believe in bringing down capitalism. So these very random, I mean, like, and this has all worsened over the past few years, I feel. Um,
I
and
mean,
like
bhakt
there
has
are people
been,
who are like,
yeah, I was
yes,
just going to say, bhakt has become an abusive word. It's a master stroke from the other side,
yeah,
isn't it? Something that is so sublime,
very
something
true.
that's a relationship between, you know, God and an individual. Um uh, I mean, it's just been turned into an abusive word.
Very true. Yeah. It is a Hinduphobic term. Now I make it a point that anyone who like, quotes or writes RSS, Bhakt or Hindutva anywhere, I make it a point that I do use a hashtag Hinduphobe and hashtag Hinduphobia.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So what else was happening in your life at that time? You do mention that after your after you attending these in-person meetings and after your run-ins with the editor, you started feeling slightly confused in your mind about what was happening, and the causes that you wanted to write about weren't just the preserve of the left, and still they were saying no.
Mhm.
They were still saying no to you. So what was going on then? What happened next? If you could walk us through your journey.
Yeah. So, first of all of these experiences, while being a practicing Hindu, having some internal resistance to not give up my faith and my culture and my identity, because I was very tied to my accent. I did not want to give it up. I was very tied to my chai. I did not want to give that up. And uh, along with this, when you try to move to the left, and then you're rejected, and you see like this dissonance, it puts you into a very bad spiral of thoughts where you're not able to process things, and then it in my case it deepened the chasm of and then made me very underconfident, with low self-esteem. Everything became very private. So even like talking about my culture, I would not take pride in that, and I would like in general like feel that it was all attributable to me, because what my if my culture is not good enough, then I'm not good enough. Internally, that's how it became, and this brings me to my third pivotal moment probably in my life. So until now, I had only seen covert attacks on Hinduism or myself, but now I started seeing overt Hinduphobic attacks on myself. And this happened when I graduated from college, and I went to my first job, and there were a few racist people on my team. Um, and I faced very clear overt Hinduphobic attacks there. And that came at a very bad point in time in my life, because I was suffering from imposter syndrome because of low confidence and self esteem because of this experience in the past. And then this happened. Um, so, for example, I can give a few examples of how this actually happened.
Yeah, this would be
So I'm
difficult.
a vegetarian.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Please go on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm a vegetarian, right? So questions like, so Abhi, what are you eating for breakfast? Fruit. And this is not just like a very, genuinely curious question. This
Curious. Yeah.
person knew, and everyone else was eating, either croissants or like sausage or whatever. And he knew exactly that there were no options for me. And when I started eating fruit, and he asked me, like, what are you eating for breakfast? You're eating fruit. And he started smirking and laughing. And that was fine. I mean, like, it could still pass as, some kind of joke that I was not able to take well because I did not have a good sense of humor. But then there were statements like, "Oh, these Indians are like, we can't eat meat, but we'll eat a 4,000 calorie meal instead. What are you going to get for me from India anyway? A monkey?" So when the attacks
Wow,
like these
did
happen,
someone actually
they
say
really
that to
irk
you?
me. I know, right? I mean, like, I had only seen things like this happen in the movies, but when this actually happened to me, I was like, what? I could not even process and I could not even respond at the time. And then this later on, when I processed it, I was so angered and I felt so sad and so ashamed that I could not do anything at that point. Um, and this kind of made me feel very unsafe at workplace. And now all the words about feeling unsafe at workplace, being attacked, harassment, all of those things started making sense because earlier I used to think, I mean, like, come on, if someone did something bad to you, they're a mean person, and they said something, but you actually start feeling unsafe because you know that they feel that you're lesser than them, and there are consequences. For example, in my case, I could see that there was a clique in my team who clearly like did not like me. Probably there were some other reasons behind it, but this person was definitely part of the clique. So I'm sure that he said certain things to them about me, and I could see good work going out of my hands. I could see myself being coupled with people who had bad reviews, and no one else wanted to work with them. So I was put together with them. So it had a professional impact in my life as well. Personally, it was even worse, and I call this probably the worst phase of my life because it had such a tremendous impact. And I want to like explain this in detail how it happened because I want to make sure that this never happens to anyone else. Um, so when all of these attacks happened, it completely killed me from the inside. I had such low self-esteem that actually my volume went down when I was at workplace. So if someone asked me, "Hey, Abhi, do you want to go for lunch?" Yeah, no, my volume was so low that they could not even hear that I was speaking something. When I used to go to the office, I used to sit in a pod because I did not want to see anyone and I did not want anyone else to see me. Basically, I wanted to be invisible. Um, so the oppressor in this case was effective in making me feel, diminished effectively, and I hated that feeling. Um, and this is like not even beginning to scrape the surface. I mean, uh, the impact it had on my personal life as well. So when I had to, like, my friends would say, "Hey, Abhi, let's go out for a movie, or do you want to like just go out today?" 3 out of the 5 times I would say no, and I would just sit at home and do nothing. I would feel completely lethargic. I would feel, de-energized because something was not right, and I do not know when things were going to get fixed because I did not know how to fix things at that point. I was also a student on a visa. I have my family obligations. I know personal obligations, right? I did not want to give up my career because of some asshole who was saying things to me. I
Yeah.
did think about raising these issues at workplace, but I also felt that this person who did all of these things to me, he has a family, he has a wife, and then what if, like, he's fired, what will happen to him, and so on. And then I also felt that probably it will not have any impact because earlier I had someone else on my team who was a bully, who was also potentially a racist. Um, and I raised this issue about him being a bully, and the person who I reported this to did not take like any action on it. And in fact, what was suggested was, why don't you sit together with this person in a room and sort it out face to face? Why don't you sit together in front of your bully and say how you felt? I
God.
obviously I said no. And a few days later, I saw that probably this bully already they came to know from somewhere. I'm guessing, I don't know for a fact, but yeah, it was the walls were very like blurred, and probably the message went out, and that wasn't the thing for me. So effectively, my identity became my own. Uh, it came to the detriment of my own growth at the place. So all of these things happened, and it was like a very, very bad phase.
So, Abhishek, I want to pitch in here and say that first, it's very brave of you to share something so personal with us, and it must have taken a lot from you to overcome these feelings. Whatever happened with you was, of course, not right, and I think you would have it would have taken a lot of mental fortitude and courage to come overcome this. But I think even for the audiences, maybe we should take a minute and understand what was happening here. Like Abhishek says, it um, he did face concerted Hinduphobic and racist attacks, but we should see how his mind was working. At the end of it, he still felt that maybe there was some issue with him, or maybe he shouldn't report it because the abuser, the bully, also had a family and kids. These are very important signs that we should recognize. uh, if you're feeling that you're at the receiving end of abusive attacks at work or at school, and you still feel that maybe it is your fault, or maybe the person didn't mean to be a bully or mean to abuse you, or maybe you shouldn't report them, these are clear signs of Hinduphobic and racist attacks. I think a lot of young people may not even understand that they are going through this, or they are being targeted. I think I think that's one thing that's a takeaway for me, that we should probably start thinking about these things and the kind of signals that we get from such abusers, and we shouldn't probably over rationalize their actions. What is an abuse, what is an attack, is an attack. Giving them positive meanings or intentions is not going to help us. Yes,
Very
yes,
true.
Abhishek.
And
Yeah.
actually, yeah, actually, my imposter syndrome also worsened the situation because when these things were happening, um, my imposter syndrome kept me from actually accepting, first of all, the situation, and then identifying the perpetrator, what was happening. And I'll explain this with the help of an example. So, for example, in my mind, I was thinking, and this is what I call, like this. Many times, coloniality is hard to diagnose because there is a gap between what's said, what's thought, and what's actually done. So, for example, I would say, oh no, I'm a very independent, liberal person. I was born in the 90s. All of these things don't matter. And, I'm working with people in the US and we're all equals. This is what I would say. Interestingly, this is what I would think also, that, like reviews are like very consistent and, things don't matter. And like, it's my competency or my skills. But what's done is completely different. Internally, my heart still thinks that my opinions probably don't matter as much. When I explain something, I have to explain it 5 times just so that the white person can actually accept me. And then I wait for their validation to say, oh, good point, Abhi. So uh, there's a consistent difference between what you actually speak, even think, like basically when you even speak to yourself, you're not ready to accept that
We've internalized it
you're
so
free
much.
from coloniality.
Yeah, we've
Exactly.
internalized it that
So
the
even
white person is right. Yeah.
yeah, and like even when I would like speak to myself, I would say, no, no, I'm not colonial. I'm not colonial. I'm not that kind of a person. I don't have that baggage. But when it actually happens, when it comes to like action, I would show my coloniality. So after these things happened, I had to like really sit and think and talk to myself. Like, be honest to yourself for once. Does do these things matter to you? Yes, it did. It did,
Yeah.
and I had to accept
Opinions are
that.
good
And
goods. Yeah.
it was, yeah, and it was an exercise in self-reflection and also coming to terms with my own, feelings, because it's very embarrassing to accept that you yourself feel that you are lesser than someone else.
And I
So
think
till
it
that
is
happens, the healing process cannot start.
right. And I think this feeling is very strong amongst people who've grown up in India and then gone to the US for higher education or for work. it's very difficult to shake off that feeling that, you are
Yeah.
actually on an equal footing or an equal platform. Subconsciously, we are looking for
Yeah.
their approval, we are looking for kind words from them, we're looking for their praise, we want to be in their good books. I'm guessing this is a common experience for all Indians moving to the US, or for that matter, anywhere in the West. We are made to believe
Yeah.
that our education, our opinions are still not up to mark. Yeah.
True. 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 And we spend like so much time working on our own, like if we have a piece of work to do, we would like spend two times the amount of time on us anyone else would spend on it, because we just think that we can't mess this up. You know, stakes are too high.
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. We over criticize, self edit, self critique ourselves and everything
Hmm.
that we do. Because all
Yeah.
everything has to be perfect. There has to be no room for error.
Yeah.
Wow, this must have taken quite a toll on your physical, mental health. So what happened
A
next,
lot.
Abhishek?
A lot. Then yeah, I mean, like this third pivotal thing. So the pivot actually happened. I should say probably a couple of years back when I started watching videos of Chesai Deepak. And one good thing about him is that he has spoken about like three, four, five topics all together at once. So he's spoken about all of these topics together. For example, the Islamic invasions, about coloniality, constitution, about the latest challenges, but also like with pop references and so on. So when I started watching his videos, I could not just something just made sense. So I don't even remember what was the first video of him that I saw, but I could not just stop. So over the next like 30 days or so, I spent my leisure time like completely watching each and every one of his videos, and that set me on a trajectory of starting my own decolonial journey, because till then I had not even realized that there is something called as decoloniality, and this like the different types of coloniality that happen, and then the resurgence of the Indic Renaissance, Bharat, and all of these terms, they all like it just made sense. And this was, by the way, the right that I always had in mind, uh, that I always wanted to be a part of, but actually never saw outside because I never wanted to see it. So it was there in front of me, but I just could not see it because I was wearing the lenses of the left. So once I knew that actually this is the actually this is how right looks like, or the index side looks like. I knew I had found a place for myself. I knew this is home. And it was such an overwhelming experience because my identity was valid, my culture was something that I could take pride in, and this was based on facts and not based on hoo-ha and like just like made up stuff. And there was this community of people, wonderful community of people I could connect with in different places. J. Sai Deepak, Dr. Indu Vishwanathan. So it was a very overwhelming moment in my life, because I knew I had found my home,
Safe
my
space, yeah.
spiritual, my
Safe
cultural home.
space.
Yeah.
Right. You would have felt space, safe in this space.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what happened next while you started exploring these topics and revisiting your heritage, your roots? How did it affect you? How did it start to reflect in your, let's say, your work and life?
So I started putting these things like my life back piece by piece. First thing is that it gave me a lot of confidence that uh, first of all, my points are valid. Secondly, I don't come up from a culture that has been we're not a defeatist, we are not a defeated society. We have so much to be proud of, and it's okay if I say something. If you don't like it, take it or leave it. I never had the courage to say that earlier. So I started my decolonial journey, and the kind of confidence it gave me, no amount of training or self-help reading could have helped with that. And this is the power of our dharma, I think. Um,
So
you
true.
can criticize the government and India, and you can all do all of these things, but it will still empower you because it is like it transcends like time and boundaries, fundamental principles. So I became more confident. I became more assertive at work. I got my first promotion. And I got my second promotion after that. I could see uh, visible changes in the way I spoke, the volume levels, the number of interventions I would make, the number of interjections I would make during communications and calls. I started mentoring juniors, and I mean, I started wearing my culture on my sleeves. So some of the actions that I took at this time, just as a form of resistance, I know resistance is a word used very commonly by the left, but this was my own resistance because after so much time, um, I had found my place. This was an eureka moment for me. So I had all the right to shout about it from the rooftops. So, for example, when I would go on Zoom calls, I would first do a namaste and then say a hello. Uh, on days of special significance, I would wear an Indian label pin on my shirt, even when I was on Zoom calls. That kind of always struck a conversation with folks. They would ask, "Oh, why are you wearing this flag today?" And I would say, on this day we amended Article 370 and so on. So I started taking pride in these things, and it made me feel that I belonged somewhere, and I had something nice to share, and I have something to be proud about, and that gave me a different level of confidence that nothing else could have given.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting initiatives. So, uh, how did you think up of these, and what else did you then do at work?
Yeah, I mean, like I did so many other things. I started going to office more often. I started interacting with more colleagues. I was not ashamed of actually wearing my identity on my sleeve. So, for example, I noticed that there were so many other festivals that got a lot of attention in my company, but despite there being a lot of other Indians, Diwali, for example, was never given enough attention. So I took this year, I took the rein in my hands, and I volunteered for organizing a nice Diwali event in my office, and it was big success. And it wasn't just like the usual, hey, people come, come for Diwali. There are diyas. This is the South Asian festival. No, I made sure that the word Hindu was used there because uh, it is a Hindu festival. You cannot take that away. And there are always attempts of secularizing our festivals. So, for example, I I welcome people who are coming to the event with a chandan tika. I lit a dhoop, and I put like marigold garlands all around. And like we mentioned, I put like posters around the room mentioning what Diwali actually means and so on. So I felt I mean, like that was the highlight for me of the entire year, that I have done something nice, and like it's almost now almost addictive. I want to do something next year, and I want to keep adding to this because this gives me a lot of energy.
This is so addictive and inspiring, even for us. I mean, this is literally taking agency, taking control of your narrative, and educating others. How was the response to Diwali celebrations?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, like people were so interested, and even like people who were not from the subcontinent, who were fairly new, they were so intrigued. They were asking, "What is this? What is this bindi? Why is it smelling so nice?" And I just felt so nice that like there is so many nice things about our culture, and yeah, I mean, the response was fantastic.
Wow, wow, that's really nice to know. So, where do we go from here, Abhishek? At what mental space are you in these days? And that is one, and another is we are definitely keen to know what strategies, what tips would you give to other young Indians who plan to study in the US or in the West and work in the US or West, what can we do to identify signs of attacks or abuse? And how do we ensure
Mhm.
that we don't give up our agency?
Yeah. So, firstly, I've moved from surviving to thriving, and I'm very happy to share that. I've started my decolonial journey and journey of healing after experiencing Hinduphobic attacks. Um, I've also started actively engaging in conversations. So, one of the personal pledges that I've made this year is that I'm not going to let conversations go. If I see someone who's Hinduphobic, no matter what that situation is, I'm going to raise my voice. If I see some discussions, or especially in Indian uh, mocking Indian culture and our Sanatana Dharma, I'm going to speak up about it, and I'm going to engage them in conversations. Not be like it's not going to be a debate, but it's going to be a conversation. And I've already done that with a couple of people who have started becoming more open to ideas. One more example I want to share here is that I have a niece living in the US who was born in the US, and my sister and my brother-in-law, they've spent. I mean, like ever since she was born, everyone knew that she was going to go to a good college. She was very smart, and like at one point, she wanted to go to a specific organization that we were all very excited about. But now that she's at this point in her life where they have to apply for colleges and all of a sudden her energy is down, and she's not even applying to Ivy Leagues. She's not applying to any of the good colleges. And when I actually asked her, um, turns out like when I spoke to her, and she would like my sister would say that she keeps talking about, oh, these good colleges are they're just money sucking corporations, and it's all capitalism and so on. So when I spoke to her, it turns out that she was uh, bitten by the leftist bug, and she was clearly very derailed because she did not understand all of these ideas, but she did not also know what she was putting at stake. She was putting at stake uh, the so many years of hard work of her own parents, of herself, and she wanted to create a change by being outside the system. In order to beat the system, you have to be inside the system first. So I had to explain that to her. And I think this is the story probably of a lot of Indian parents and a lot of Indian and their kids in the US today. Uh, so please identify these signs of being exposed, because you cannot stop them from being exposed to these things. So once they are, please make sure that you're there to address it. Now, coming to
Do
what
you
you spoke
mean,
about, Hinduphobic attacks. Mhm.
sorry, if I may ask, do you mean that these young kids would suddenly lose interest in their aspirations and dreams and sort of give up, that they don't want to pursue these dreams because Ivy League colleges are whatever they are, whatever they stand for? They don't want to basically pursue their dreams of careers. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. Probably their dreams might change, but their dreams will be different now, because their dreams will also now be aligned with the ideology they subscribe to. So in a way, yes, but not that like they would completely give up the idea of working,
Hmm.
or give up on like dreams of being like good professionals. But now their ideas, like what they want to do, is something totally different. They might
Hmm.
move from like being like, for example, a marketer, or being a person with an MBA, to becoming a journalist, to becoming a book writer, or something like that. And like, just these are just examples, not saying that anything is bad, but like
Hmm.
it would be probably a shift like that.
Basically, a lot of
Now
disenchantment
coming
with
to
disenchantment with the
yes.
system.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes. Disenchantment with the system also. So, for example, this like it can also be not believing in, like, not going to Indian functions, or like religious functions, not attending any of those. I remember very clearly, my niece actually, in her SOP, she wrote something about how she wants to not conform to any um, religion or any kind of, any kind of identity actually. Um, so this is also a spiral that they can go into when they also probably have experience endophobic attacks.
True. Yeah. Yeah. What other tips would you give? You've clearly spoken about taking charge of your narrative, speaking up when you see
Mhm.
somebody's ill-informed, or engaging them in debate. What about workplace harassment or these veiled attacks? One is, how do you even identify that something is genuine interest versus something is an attack? And second is, what can young Indians do to fight these?
Yeah, that's a very fine line between general curiosity and someone being a Hinduphobe. No, I don't have a very clear, formula for identifying that, but I would say if you feel that such things are messing up with your mental state, whether or not it is a joke, if it affects you, it is Hinduphobic. Um, so, like, always be ready to raise it and flag it. The person who is coming from a good place is going to understand it. And probably it's going to be a conversation where you both, towards the end of the conversation, you both are laughing about it. But if it's not, then you know that your doubts were not wrong. In any case, you should not doubt yourself, because this is something that we have and our forefathers have faced over centuries. So this is not a joke. It can actually really affect you and the way you work. Another thing to note is that two things actually. So you can be a practicing Hindu and a Hindu phobe yourself, which was true in my case. So I was a practicing Hindu, but there were some parts of my tradition and my culture that I was very ashamed about. So I would keep them very private. At the same time, I would mock things. Like, for example, I would want to watch NDTV over Aaj Tak because just by the fact that Aaj Tak was um, like a Hindi channel, it automatically became Bhagwa, RSS, Saffron, and whatnot for me. So you can actually be a practicing Hindu and still be a Hindu phobe, and at the same time, you can be a Hindu phobe and still be the center of attack, a Hinduphobic attack. So just because you're a Hindu phobe and you're ready to prove your liberal credentials by shaming Indian culture does not mean that you're not going to be the center of a Hinduphobic attack. So both
Very,
these things
very
can happen.
important, I think, very important to keep in mind that even if you feel you're in their camp or you support them, they'll still come after you. They'll still attack you. They'll still attack your identity.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And what about workplace?
And
Because you,
probably like, mhm.
yeah, yeah. Are the present day current workplaces, let's say in the US, how open are they to registering such complaints and taking strict actions? What happened in your case? Did you end up, reporting the behavior? And what should people do in such cases? Because these are really sticky matters. They can really affect your career as well.
Yeah, yeah, very true. So I think it broadly in the US, in all workplaces, there are very strict mechanisms put in place to make them very safe working environments. But it is only as safe as they're only safe to the point that people feel safe enough to report things. So I think the onus is more on people like us with whom it happens, and also like bystanders, for example. So I think the communication has to be very clear and the communication has to be made, but it will only be made when you actually feel that it is a valid attack. And that also brings us back to like a decolonial exercise, because if you're not, if you're coming from a colonial mindset, you will still keep feeling that you probably deserve it, or probably it's not something that's wrong, or all of these things. So you will not end up reporting it. So it will come back to the onus is on us. We need to decolonize our minds. And by talking about decoloniality, I also want to mention one thing. It's a continuous process. It's not like something that definitely cannot happen in one day. It definitely cannot happen over 1 year. It will probably last our lifetime, but it will keep getting better. uh, this is what I personally feel, because I don't think that I'll ever be at a place in my life where I'll feel that I'm like completely 100% free from coloniality. So it's a constant exercise.
True, true. I think just the fact that you're able to reach a place where you understand and face up to the fact that you've probably been a closet Hindu phobe and trying to correct that, trying to connect with your roots, and also taking charge of your narrative. I think that's the most positive and inspiring thing that anyone can do. And like you said, it doesn't happen in a day or a year, because these are years of conditioning. And it's
Mhm.
not like it's stopped
Yeah.
every single day. At least in India, we still keep receiving such strong messages, stark messages around what Hinduism is, what and how attractive the other side is. So it's not easy to get over that and see things as they are. You're right there. It's a continuous endeavor.
Yeah.
So I think we have a couple of questions. If we have 2 or 3 minutes, we could take those. I think one question is around, okay, it's on your schooling. Given that you were in a Catholic school, what would have helped you to stay connected to Hindu roots as you grew up? What do you
Yeah.
think would have
So
helped?
two things. One, from the system side, the school could have made a better effort of giving equal representation, or at least some representation, to Hindu and, like, some other festivals from other religions as well. I'm not saying that we were like completely kept away from it, but good enough efforts were never made. Secondly, from the syllabus point of view, I think the state government should have had made, like, I mean, like, from the syllabus point of view, there is a lot that needs to be done. So probably fixing that could help. And then lastly, from the other side, from outside the system, um, probably because our society is in clutches, in like the Hindu temples are under state control, so we don't have like a mechanism in place where uh, we, or even our parents, or any Hindus can actually, uh, I don't know how to put it in words properly, but I mean, there is no system in place for us to access that knowledge. There are lots of books, but it's very distributed. It is very unstructured.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
I think now we have a university for, there's an online university for Hindu studies and so on. That's
yeah,
we probably never had that. Had we had that, or like, probably, like, for example, if I went to the temple and there was a priest, right, who was well learned, and like they had their own system to, and this constant giving down of information was happening for the past few generations. We would have gotten that education in the temples, so that could have been another source. But unfortunately, this source was cut down, and then whatever we got from the other side, from the system, was completely negative, and that's what converted us to Hinduphobic people.
yeah, yeah. And the hangover is still quite strong. I think it will take conscious effort and endeavor on the part of the individual itself. Once the realization hits, I think we'll consciously have to take a lot of efforts to read up, to revisit. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's another question. So, do you think Hindus in the US are able to? So, from your experience, do you think Hindus in the US are able to decode this Hindu phobic behavior from others, or there's still confusion, or do you think people are able to identify signs when they see Hindu phobic attacks?
I think so. Actually, more than people coming from India, they are able to identify it better, because Um, yeah, because I mean, as we come from India, we usually treat all of these things as questions, and we come from a very different cultural context where we ask a lot of personal questions very easily, you know. And here in the US, things are very you have to. I mean, like things are quite different. So you know exactly when someone is being very intruding and when they're trying to poke fun at you and when they're actually trying to be racist. So I think to a large extent they are able to identify that. But the more important question I think there is that does it matter to them? Because a lot of them have already kind of no, I wouldn't say a lot. Like many of them have uh, already started giving up on their roots,
Or
um,
internalize
especially the
the,
younger generation.
yeah, or
Yeah,
internalize the message that
they
they are
have started
inferior.
getting deracinated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. So even if they are able to pick on this, they are there is this internal inferior feeling, and then you just want to be a good model student and a model worker in the office, and you go about your life without questioning, without challenging, right?
Yeah, or they're completely deracinated. So they will start pulsing out information to their colleagues or their friends, or that they oh, I don't believe in like Hinduism. I mean, like it's I just do it for my parents. It's just like
Hmm.
virtue signaling and whatnot. So they'll start giving out signs that I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. So this doesn't apply to me.
Right, right. Great,
And
Abhishek.
that's
I think,
also quite common for people coming from India too.
yeah, yeah. I think more so for people coming from India. Yeah.
Mhm.
Great, Abhishek. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything, any last few tips or tricks or advice for young people who are either joining the workforce or joining universities? Oh, what is this one key
Uh,
message that you want people to
mhm.
walk away from your story?
Yeah, I like one thing is find your space, find your tribe, and don't give it up. Don't pack yourself up in one bubble like I did. Look for help. Speak to people. If you feel that someone needs help, like be the first one to speak up, probably because they might not actively seek help. And Hindu phobia is very much real, very, very much real. And know that your feelings are valid. If you're not feeling okay about something, it's not okay. It's not okay for someone to do that to you. Decoloniality is a long exercise. You can like you can be a practicing Hindu and still be a Hindu phobe, and like I mentioned, you can be a Hindu phobe but still be the center of an attack that is Hinduphobic in nature. So there's a lot to, I mean, like read into. Uh, but yeah, my one key message would be to just communicate, communicate, and communicate.
True, true. It's been quite an enlightening, slightly scary, but ultimately really, really very inspiring chat, Abhishek. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and I can only hope that people who've been in the audiences and have uh, listened to you speak about your experiences are today walking away with they in future they'll be able to identify signs of veiled attacks and uh, overt attacks on their identity, and they can take some inspiration and probably practice or apply the strategies that you've been applying at your workplace about being a lot more vocal, about participating, about taking opportunities to educate other people and communities about Hinduism, Hindu festivals, ensuring that you use the word Hindu and not South Asian, basically taking charge of your identity and narrative. It's been really inspiring for me, and I hope everybody's had a wonderful time listening into you. Thank you so much for taking time out this Sunday for all of us.
I should be thanking you, Muktaji. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak about this. You have no idea how much power this talk has given me. And I really hope that this helps. And I thank you genuinely and your group for giving me this opportunity today. Thank you.
We couldn't be happier. Thank you so much. Good night to you, and good day to everyone who's been listening to us from the US and other parts of the world. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.